Hey everybody, this is No Bones About Wrestling. I'm your host Asa, and I'm here with Kay Fabulous.
Hey.
And we're going to talk about the movie Angle. It's the new Peacock documentary talking about, of course, Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle, former WWE World Champion, Intercontinental Champion, you name it, he held the belt. Tag Team Champion, I'm sure. It's okay. What did you think of the movie?
I thought it was good. It was sad.
It was sad.
The beginning was pretty inspirational and also a little crazy.
Well, it was crazy. You're all over the place. Stick with me. What was your general feeling on the movie?
It was depressing.
It was depressing. Well, why was it depressing?
Because he was in so much pain for so much of his life, and he had a huge drug problem that spiraled out of control and was ruining his life.
Yeah, he talked about his problem with his addiction to opiates, which we've seen a lot of people in our country and around the world have dealt with in the last decade or so. Opiate addiction and opioid addiction. We'll talk about that some later. I don't want to start with the depressing stuff, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, of course. No, you're just asking my
Yeah.
overall impression. It was a little depressing.
Yeah, he got a lot of injuries from, he got one injury from amateur wrestling, a lot of injuries from pro wrestling, because he did it for longer, and then ended up a drug addict, a pill addict. And it's a shame. He said at one point he was taking 85 pills a day,
That's insane.
Yeah, that's insane.
His liver has to be, fucked.
Yeah, well, the liver is very resilient, as I understand it. So if you can stop the bad things you do to it, a lot of times it can repair itself. So you gotta stop,
Yeah.
But so let's talk a little bit about who Kurt Angle is. For some of the younger viewers or listeners, they might have kind of missed him altogether, really. And the documentary didn't talk too much about his pro wrestling career, really. Didn't talk a whole lot about it.
It focused more on his journey to the Olympics and then his life as a pro wrestler more than his career as a pro wrestler.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, so his journey to the Olympics, that's a good way to start. His training regimen was something else.
It was psychotic.
It was psychotic, yes.
Psychotic.
He talked about his training. He figured that what he would do to gain an edge over his amateur wrestling opponents was what he called exhaustion training, which is he would work himself to the point of exhaustion, and then that is when his real workout began, which is a crazy thing to think or to do. But he did this, and he would do it. How many times did he say he worked out a day? 3? Is that what he said?
He said he worked out for 10 hours a day.
Is that what he said?
Yeah.
So 3 times a day, probably, yeah.
Probably.
Like 3 and 20 minutes, probably, each time. So yeah, he had this amazing workout routine, and they show the guy, and even in high school, he has this, his neck almost doesn't exist like you and I have a neck. His neck is just a little stump. It's like a tree trunk. It's this huge, wide neck.
Yeah.
That I get helps him get so much leverage. I don't know.
Well, he started out as a football player.
Right.
And football players, depending on what position you play, a lot of them have no neck, like Kurt Angle,
Yeah, because the weightlifting.
Yeah. And then he went from a football player to a wrestler, but his weightlifting regime was crazy, So I think his neck just got wider and wider. At one point, his neck is wider than his head.
Yeah, definitely. In one of the pictures, I swear his neck was wider than his head. I mean, that can't be true.
Crazy.
But I swear.
I mean, it looked true.
I swear it was true.
He had to have a hard time finding dress shirts.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So he was, he had a hell of a time. And he trained with, in Pennsylvania. He's from Pittsburgh. I might have mentioned that earlier. And he trained with Foxcatcher, Team Foxcatcher, I think they're called. Which, if you're not familiar with that, the chemical millionaire John DuPont of DuPont. They make a lot of chemicals. They make paint. Yeah. Chemical removers, cleaners, all sorts of chemicals. They make them. And they've been based in Pennsylvania forever. And John DuPont is an interesting fellow.
Nut job.
Well, we can't say that on the air.
Alleged nut job.
An alleged nut job. And he's an interesting fellow. And was a real gun collector. And eventually, Dave Schultz, who was a 1984 Olympic wrestling gold medalist for the USA, was one of Kurt's coaches. And John DuPont and Dave Schultz had some sort of disagreement, which may or may not have existed wholly in John DuPont's mind. But John DuPont shot Dave Schultz on the grounds where Dave Schultz actually lived, in a house on the grounds there, and where John DuPont had his big mansion. There's a smaller house, I think, where Schultz and his family lived, and then they had a big place for all the wrestlers to wrestle, all the USA-sponsored Team USA wrestlers to wrestle. But John DuPont shot him, and then went and shot him in the back to make sure he was dead, too. Really fucked up, unsettling murder.
And it was in front of his wife.
Yeah. In front of Schultz's wife. So that really, messed up things for the United States wrestlers. Mentally, obviously, it's quite a setback. Not only being just throwing a wrench in your training, which training is a big deal when you're an Olympic athlete. You got to keep up your training. But just mentally, having to go through something like that with one of your coaches, I can't even think what that's like. And then having to find a new coach after that. Well, what happened to your last coach? Oh, he was brutally murdered in front of his family.
Well, not just that, but, I mean, John DuPont was also funding and paying the stipends for these athletes so that they could live their dream and not have to have a job.
Exactly.
And so then it's not only I need to find a new coach, I need to find a new place to train, I need to find some sort of money to allow me to do this or it's done.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so Kurt got, actually there was some, what was it, Dave Schultz's wife?
Yes.
Where'd the money come from?
She contacted companies to sponsor, and I guess companies contacted her as well. And so she started the Dave Schultz, I don't know if it was Wrestling Club.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
And she immediately called Kurt Angle, and he was the first wrestler to sign up in the new school of wrestling.
Yeah, so that's cool. I mean, it easily could have gone, if that hadn't happened, who knows what would have happened to Angle's Olympic dreams,
Yeah.
But, so all this happens, and, Angle's hopes can't get derailed, and, he's heading towards, we're talking about, this is the mid-90s, because he's looking at the 96 Olympic Games in Atlanta. And all this happens, and eventually in one of the qualifying tournaments in America, before the Olympics, he breaks his neck. And they show the x-rays and all this, and they show where he gets just dropped on his face, and the rest of his body just, splits backwards on his, with his face as the fulcrum of his body. It's pretty sick to watch.
What's crazy is he finished the tournament.
Yeah, he finished the tournament.
With a broken neck.
And won with a broken neck.
Yeah, he didn't know it was broken at the time. But he talked about how pain would be shooting down his back and his arms, and he couldn't feel his arms. But he still won the tournament. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah. So that's how he qualified for the Olympics. And he went through this and he kept seeing specialists, and he was getting shots during the Olympics, was it?
He would get 12 Novocaine shots directly into his neck to numb the area so that he wouldn't be in pain while he was wrestling.
Right, yeah. He saw several doctors, like a team. Saw this doctor, that doctor, the other doctor, and they came up with a regimen of 12 shots, Novocaine shots, into his neck to dull the pain. Whew, I can't even think about it. To dull the pain so that he could wrestle.
But there was still the risk if he landed on his head wrong at any point, because of how his neck was already broken, he had an increased chance of either paralysis or death.
Yeah.
And so he had the choice to keep going with a broken neck or get surgery, which would have ruined his chances at this Olympics.
I can't believe they let him do it.
I cannot believe they let him do it.
I can't. It seems, I mean, I'm no doctor, but just the way he was describing it seems irresponsible to me, doesn't it? Yeah. If you need 12 shots before you do something, you shouldn't be doing it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
Right?
Yeah, you would think so.
I mean, again, I'm no doctor, but that makes sense to me. Just common sense.
Yeah. And I mean, he made it sound like he had to consult with several doctors before he found doctors that came up with his plan.
Yeah.
So
right.
That's questionable.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
And I mean, it's admirable that he pursued his dreams. And I mean, I'm not giving us away spoilers because we already said he's a gold medalist.
Everyone knows he's a gold medalist.
So I mean, it's admirable that he won the gold medal with a broken neck. But it's also unbelievably stupid that he did this.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, like...
Brave, stupid.
But, like, I feel like the stupid outweighs the brave. Like, how driven do you have to be? Like, how obsessed do you have to be with this goal to be so cavalier with your physical well-being and your life?
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, that gold medal was more important to him than being alive.
Yeah. It's crazy. So he did it. Yeah, he ends up beating, it comes down to him and an Iranian fellow, and the Iranians are passionate about their amateur wrestling. It's the national sport in Iran. In fact, the Iron Sheik, former WWF World Champion, was an Iranian wrestler before he became one of the bodyguards to the Shah of Iran, before he became WWF World Champion. He lived a very interesting life. But yeah, so Kurt Angle beat an Iranian fellow and won the gold medal with a broken neck. And then, of course, the question is, well, what do you do? With you don't win any money for the Olympics. All you get is a gold medal. And if you want, you can sell it. And that's the only money you can get from the Olympics.
Well, you can get, like, sponsorships and stuff.
Right. Yeah. But, I mean, directly from the Olympics.
Yeah.
You could sell your gold medal, and that's the only money you could get directly from the Olympics. Indirectly, you could get sponsorships, but most people in America don't care about amateur wrestling.
That is true.
So, there was a question of what to do about money. And they show him, and he's appearing at this and appearing at that, and none of it really leads anywhere. He's doing this interview and that interview, just local things mostly. And this is where there's one part they left out that I wish that I was wanting them to cover in this documentary, and I hate that they left it out because it's really interesting to me. And I'm going to include this story here. So, WWF was not the first wrestling company that Kurt Angle went to possibly appear in. Mm-hmm. The first company that he contacted to possibly appear in was ECW.
Why do you think he contacted them first?
So Shane Douglas, who was in ECW and was from Pittsburgh, Kurt Angle's hometown, Shane Douglas had a mutual friend. And so he got, Kurt Angle's number and called him and said, hey, and come and see us, and we're based in the Northeast here, and I'm a Pittsburgh guy, and I tell you what, we're closer to amateur wrestling than the big leagues are, like that. And
what?
Yeah, that's what he told him.
Do you think that's true?
In a little tiny way, just because they had people like Dean Malenko and Chris Jericho that could actually wrestle and shit.
Yeah, but to me, when I hear ECW, I think of like insane people doing crazy shit with weapons.
Right. And so Kurt gets there, and he's introduced around, and he sees crazy people in there with like ripped up jeans. I mean, this is like 96, 97, I think. Crazy people with like ripped up jeans and flannel shirts and weapons. Like Sandman's like smoking and holding his kendo stick, and Raven's got a ladder and this and that. And this is like the ECW lineup, the real ECW that he comes and sees. And he does an in-ring appearance. Basically, they just introduce him and say, Olympic gold medalist, Kurt Angle, what do you say? And then they come in and talk to him for a minute, and that's all. Just a, hey, how are you doing? Introduce him, see the reception he gets, and see how he handles himself. They do that, and he does commentary on a match also.
Huh.
And then later in the night, they do an angle, what's become known as the crucifixion angle, in which Raven takes the Sandman, and I think he handcuffs him. One hand, it's like on a fence, I think it was, and he handcuffs him one hand to one thing and one hand to another. That's the way I'm remembering it. I could be misremembering it. But he does put a crown of thorns on the Sandman's head, and he just keeps beating the Sandman up and puts a crown of thorns on the Sandman's head. And it's meant to, to mock the crucifixion of Jesus. And Kurt Angle says, I'm just this, he's a Christian. He says, I'm this Christian guy from Pittsburgh, and he says, and I see this, and he said, I'm offended by it. I'm shocked. I didn't know they're going to be, I'm going to this wrestling show, and they're going to be mocking the crucifixion. And he said, I told Paul Heyman that you can't show this show with me on it. He said, if you show this show with me on it, you're going to hear from my lawyer. And so they never showed the show with him on it. The part with him on it.
Was ECW taped then at that point? It wasn't
yes.
live?
Yeah, they didn't have the money to do a live TV show or the wherewithal to do a live TV show.
I did not know that about ECW.
Yeah. They didn't even do live when they got a big TV contract. Yeah, they did tape shows. But yeah, so that's and it didn't work out, obviously. So that's the Kurt Angle ECW story that I wish that they had told. I wanted to hear some interviews about that.
So it's odd that they left it out because WWE now owns ECW. So it's not like they were talking about a competing company now,
Well,
do you
think
they left it out because WWE didn't want to acknowledge that a company they owned did a crucifixion angle?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but hey, kids, if you want to see the crucifixion angle, I bet you can find it somewhere in the WWE network in there. I forget the date.
No way.
I bet you can.
If they never aired it, I bet it's
No. I said they didn't air the segments with Angle.
Oh, they still
They aired the other stuff. They just didn't air him.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, so I wish they told that story. But hey, back to the documentary. I just wanted to tell that story because I find it interesting.
No, I didn't know that story, so that's very interesting.
So he wins the gold medal and flash forward a few years, and finally he agrees in 1999 to come into WWF. And he's the first Olympic gold medalist ever to sign with WWF. And instantly, I mean, the guy is a natural. His first match, fans are chanting boring and this and that, but that's like part of his gimmick. He's doing the amateur style and this and that. They have thought this well out. And they they tell him to get on the microphone and say, "Oh, you can't boo an Olympic athlete," you know. I mean, WWF has thought this out to the T, and they've thought out the ways to get him heat, and it all works. It works like a charm, and he's quickly becomes one of the more hated heels in the company, and he is one of the best rookies. And is one of the most improved over the next few years, and just improves and keeps improving. I mean, it's amazing, and becomes, over the course of just, I'd say, 2 years or 3 years, one of the best wrestlers in North America.
What I found interesting was, like, it's not just because of his wrestling, but also his personality and, like, how he came across on the microphone, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, you hear amateur wrestler, and, you see these guys interviewed during the Olympics and stuff, and, you think, oh, it's just meathead. I don't mean to be rude, but,
No, that's what you think.
Yeah, that's what you think.
Yeah.
You see an amateur wrestler, you're not expecting them to set the world on fire with their personality. Yeah. But Kurt Angle, his personality, he's a sharp wit. He's a funny guy. He is really funny. So he fit right in the WWF. Back then, and it was the Attitude Era still. They were doing a lot of, skits and a lot of, like, comedy skits. There was quite a bit of comedy with the wrestlers in between the matches. Some of it was funny, some of it was not. Most of it was funny enough, kind of, acerbic kind of comedy that you could get if you were 16 years old. Basically that was the demo that they were going for. But Angle was good for it, and he played off of, guys like Stone Cold, Mick Foley, The Rock, and Triple H, and like I said, fit right in and worked his way very quickly into the main event picture and did very well in the WWF. But they don't talk much about his wrestling in the WWF at all. They don't talk about, and then he had this match for the Intercontinental title, and then he was the Rookie of the Year, and then he won his first world title. They don't say any of that. They show, maybe 2 minutes worth of highlights?
Yeah, it's very brief.
3 minutes worth of highlights, maybe? They show him when he brings the milk truck, and he shoots everybody with milk, a la Stone Cold Steve Austin with the beer truck. That was hilarious when he showed... Like, first off, what the fuck is a milk truck?
Yeah.
Like...
Well, what's a beer truck? Is that a thing?
Well, that's a good point, too. Yeah.
So I think if we live in a world where a beer truck can exist for Steve Austin, a milk truck can exist for Kurt Angle.
Yeah. But yeah, so they don't talk about his actual wrestling career very much at all, and I wish they had a bit more, or talk to him. Oh, I loved wrestling Eddie Guerrero, I loved wrestling Stone Cold. None of that, none of it. And then they do get into his injuries mounting up.
That's most of the matches that they show are the matches in which he got injured.
Right. Yeah, correct. And they show what are his injuries he gets.
I mean, he at one point in the interview part of the documentary lists all his injuries, but I think the most significant is that he breaks his neck, 3 or 4 more times within a 2-year period.
Yeah.
And he has, what's the name of the surgery that you had?
Spinal fusion?
No,
a laminectomy.
Laminectomy. He has a laminectomy, which is when they remove part of your
spinal column.
Yeah. He had that twice to try and avoid having a fusion surgery, because the recovery time for the kind of neck surgery that he needed, they said, was going to be possibly 9 to 12 months. And in wrestling, that's a long time to be missed and off the scene. People will forget you. So he didn't want to do that. He did talk to Steve Austin, because Steve Austin did have that surgery done and did miss a year. But that's Stone Cold Steve Austin. He can come back and still be as big as he was, if not bigger, And
he was not the same after that. Almost anyone would tell you, though.
In wrestling? How he wrestled, you mean?
I mean, he was still, very good and at a high level, but he was not the same, for sure, no. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was just, I don't know much about the history of Steve Austin, so that's why I was trying to think of when his surgery occurred. Was he already in that brawling style prior to the surgery?
Yeah, because when that really happened, his transition to the brawling style happened when he broke his neck. Owen Hart did a tombstone pile driver to him. I'm not sure if Owen slipped, if his grip slipped, or what the deal was, but I mean, he went head first, neck first, to the mat and broke his neck in 1997, I think it was. SummerSlam 97, I think it was.
But he was already, prior to breaking his neck, he was already in the brawling style? Or
no, I'm saying like after that. He came back and was pretty much limited to doing the brawling style.
Yeah.
Not as much technical proficiency and technical moves. And
was that when he was gone for a year for the fusion surgery?
I think that was later.
Okay.
Later.
And so anyway, with Kurt Angle, he had 2 laminectomies to try and temporarily fix his neck. Although they knew that the better option would be to do this fusion surgery. And so he kept getting the laminectomy, and then his neck would break again, and he would need it again, and then his neck would break again. And with this is when he started being prescribed pain pills.
Yeah, Vicodin and whatever. He didn't really say specifically, but, you gotta... He said opiates, so we're talking either Vicodin, OxyContin, both. That's what we're talking about. But yeah, he was talking about how, at first he noticed when he took them, he felt the pain went away, and he felt more euphoric and felt better, and it's a good thing. And if 1 was good, why not take 2? If 2 worked that well, shit, why not take 4? And if 4 was that good, I might as well just take 8 of them, And that's the kind of thinking that you get on, and then you get taking way too many. And that's what happened to Kurt Angle. He got trapped into the lifestyle of an addict, and the life of an addict, where number 1, before your family, your religion, your job, anything else, is your drugs. And, the only reason you have a job is so you can make sure you have money to get drugs. And that's what happened to him. And he talks about how he eventually, I mentioned this earlier at the top of the broadcast here, he eventually ends up taking 85 pills per day. That's amazing.
Yeah,
and he said how he would take them in the morning just to get going. He would take half of them in the morning to get going, and then he didn't take them during the day because he didn't want to look fucked up while he was exercising or while he was wrestling. And then after his match at night, he would take them then, the other half at night.
Yeah, and he talks at one point about how he would set, this is before he got to the 80-something pills a day, but he would set 18 pills on his nightstand so that as soon as he woke up in the morning, he would grab all 18, throw them in his mouth, and chew them so that they would get into his bloodstream faster, and then swallow them, because he would be waking up already in withdrawal from the opiates. And that's sad,
Mm-hmm.
And then like I think it happens with so many people, drug addiction leads to addiction to other drugs and also alcohol dependency. And,
Right.
and he struggled with both, where he went from outside opiates to benzos, so like Xanax, and then also combined that with alcohol, which led him into getting in trouble with the law, where I think he got 4 DUIs, he said, in the end. And at this point, when this was happening, like, he has 5 children. I think
he had 4 at that point.
4 at that point. And I mean, I think the only thing that got him clean after his 4th DUI was his wife gave him an ultimatum, basically, like, you're going to go to rehab or we're going to leave, you know? Which, I mean, I'm glad that worked. I think for a lot of addicts, ultimatums aren't the way to go, you know?
Right.
But luckily, I mean, do you want to talk about how it affected his wrestling career?
Well, sure. So one huge way it affected his wrestling career is that in WWE, they noticed, you know, certain guys would notice something was up with him. You know, he'd be slurring his words. You know, he'd be just not himself, and other wrestlers, you know, would take drugs as well, or have friends that take drugs, or know other wrestlers that take drugs, etc., etc. So they know the signs, and so they knew Kurt Angle was taking pain pills and was addicted to pain pills, and WWE tried to get him off of pain pills, and they said, "Look, dude, you need to get off of these. We want to send you to rehab." And eventually they said, "Go to rehab, or you're fired," you know. And so he chose, I'm going to keep doing my drugs, and I'm going to go and sign with shitty TNA Impact, or whatever they were called at the time.
I think it was TNA.
TNA. And that's what he did. And he left WWE, and several weeks later showed up on TNA, much to the shock of many wrestling fans.
Can I just interject that we're not saying that now Impact is shitty. We haven't watched Impact to be able to.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying back then.
Back then, yeah.
Yeah, back then. It was definitely shitty. And he showed up on it, slumming it, you know? All because he wanted to keep doing his drugs. I mean, that's a huge way to, you know, left his friends. I mean, he, you know, all these wrestlers with whom he's friends at WWE, his normal schedule, left all that behind to be able to keep doing his drugs. You know, that's what drugs will do to you.
You know, and it's not just leaving his job and his friends, like, that's his support system.
Yeah.
You know, because, I mean, he spends more time with them than he does with his family, with how often they're on the road.
Mm-hmm.
That your coworkers become your support in life, you know? So I think that's a big sign of how far gone he was. And he talks about how he didn't view himself as an addict because he thought he needed the pills for the pain, and it wasn't until later he realized he was taking them for more than just the physical pain, but also to, like, numb his thoughts and his emotion. Because during his period, or prior to his period of addiction, he lost his sister to a heroin overdose, and he had cut off contact with her, I think, 8 months prior, and has a lot of, it sounded like from when he broke down while he was talking about it, so it seems like he still carries a lot of guilt surrounding his sister's death, or regret, if not guilt, regret, about giving her an ultimatum of either get clean or I'm gonna stop talking to you.
Sometimes that's what you got to do, you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes that for the sake of your life,
Oh,
you can't have your life turned upside down all the time because of somebody else's actions, you know. Can't.
Yeah, it's just hard to live with that decision sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
Like, even if it's what's best for you at the time, if in his case, you know, something does happen to his sister, now he has this huge regret, you know?
Yeah, no.
And I'm sure it was what was best for him at the time. Like, it sounds like he was, one, trying to help her by snapping her out of it, and two, like, it was draining his family, both financially and emotionally, and, yeah. Addiction's a hard thing to live with, you know, as the person addicted or as the person who cares about the person addicted.
Mm-hmm. And, eventually, though, Kurt does beat his addiction. He doesn't go into too much detail, really, about how.
No, he just talks about going to rehab, and he talks about the withdrawal process and how rehab is, like, the worst experience of his life, basically, but that it saved his life, you know?
Mm-hmm. And he said he's, 7 years sober now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he returned to WWE actively for 2 years from 2019 to 2021. Lost his retirement match to Baron Corbin.
Oh my God, I didn't realize that. Was that in the documentary?
No, that was not in the documentary.
Okay, I didn't think so.
He did, though.
Yeah. God. Of all people to lose your retirement match to.
Yeah, and is in the WWE Hall of Fame. So 7 years clean and sober. So hopefully his tale does have a happy ending and he stays sober.
He talks about how his life is now devoted to his family and how he missed a lot of raising his oldest child because he was gone so much. And then when he was home, he was high a lot of the time, you know. And so he talks about how his life is now devoted to raising his kids the right way.
And what sucks, though, is I was reading a post of his on social media. He still has operations he needs. Mm-hmm. He still has pain that he's in. Yeah. But I'm assuming he doesn't take pain medication.
They talked about that in the documentary.
Oh, did I miss that?
Yeah, because he had, like, a knee surgery or something like that.
Yeah.
And his wife told him, like, you're not taking anything. You're going to find a way to deal with this pain because you're not taking a single pill because we're not going down that road again and I'm not going down it with you. And so he had knee surgery and did it without medication.
That's insane.
Yeah. It's insane, too, because, I mean, if you talk to the doctor as an addict, they can prescribe medication that's non-habit forming to help you, you know, which is maybe what they did, and they just were talking about habit-forming drugs. Mm-hmm. But there's all sorts of ways to alleviate pain other than just opiates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they're the best. That's why they've been around for so long, because they work. Mm-hmm. That's why people take them, because they work.
They're the best and the worst, you know. I mean, think about how many lives they've destroyed.
Yeah.
But it's hard when something helps you and also hurts you at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's tough, yeah. It's tough. But it was an interesting story. I knew he was an addict, but that was it. I didn't know the extent of it. Certainly didn't know he was taking 85 pills a day. And he showed this log book where he kept track of all the places from which he was getting his prescriptions. And it was like it was like Monday, call Dr. So-and-so. Wednesday, call Dr. So-and-so. Friday, shipment from Mexico, $1,300. Monday, shipment from Mexico number 2, $1,500.
Yeah, he talked about how basically acquiring the amount of drugs he needed to function, or in his eyes function, became his job. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because when he's training for the Olympics, they also show you his schedule about, like, his workout schedule. And how insane that is. Look on a calendar. They show you, I think, 2 years worth of calendars, like, lined up. Which it's neat that he kept it for that long. But then it's sad that, like, later on in the story, they show you essentially the same thing, but it's just all drugs. So it provides an interesting arc to the story.
It's really sad.
Yeah. And it's nice that his story ends with, like, a positive outcome and hope, you know?
Yeah.
Because I think for so many people, including so many wrestlers
especially,
that's not how their stories ended, you know?
Yeah, some guys have beat it. Jake the Snake used to be an addict and beat it. I'm just trying to think of some positive names. William Regal.
Dustin Rhodes,
yeah.
Eddie Guerrero beat it until he had his heart issue from it, you know?
Yeah.
But he got clean.
Who? Eddie?
Eddie, yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Yeah, that sucked. Eddie Guerrero dying. Anyways, but, so yeah, it's worth watching. It's an interesting, it's a bit of a downer, I'll tell you that. Well, it's weird. The first half is super inspiring. The second half is super depressing until, like, the last 10 minutes.
I found very little of the beginning inspiring. Like, I found, like, maybe up until they started talking about his workout schedule inspiring. And then it became, like, once he got his injury, like, that was no longer inspiring to me. That was concerning.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, I was, like, even knowing how the story turned out,
yeah,
I cannot believe that he took that risk.
Yeah.
And, like, I think he's stupid for taking that risk. And I can't believe that no one in his life cared about him enough to, like, talk him out of it, you know, and make it, like, their mission in life to make sure that he didn't continue to wrestle, like, to convince him.
Yeah, to say, Kurt, it's just a gold medal, dude.
Yeah,
Don't risk your life over it. Jesus Christ.
Becoming paralyzed or dying.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, his story turned out positive, but it so easily could have been a story about paralysis or death at the Olympics.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. And he also talks about, like, all of his opponents knew about his neck injury and that his neck was broken.
It shows how one guy went after it.
Well, all of them that he competed against went after it, but the guy who he competed with for the spot to be on the Olympic team, he went after it, like, so hard that it was, like, opening him up for Kurt to take him down, so it was, like, to his detriment. But, I mean, so it wasn't just he was continuing to wrestle with a broken neck. He was continuing to wrestle with a broken neck with every opponent he faced targeting his broken neck, trying to re-injure it, you know, or increase the injury.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just astronomical risk.
Yeah.
So to me, like, that's where it lost its, like, because, like, a lot of Olympic stories are inspirational, you know, because it's about hard work and dedication and the payoff. And, like, achieving your lifelong dream, which is normally an inspirational story, but for me with this one, it was just like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah, I got you. Well, pretty interesting story. I would recommend it.
I would too, as much as it doesn't, I know it sounds like I'm not being positive, but I enjoyed it. You know, it was an interesting story. What would you, if you gave this a bone rating?
If I give it a bone rating, probably give it 3 bones out of 5, I'd say. It's interesting. Bit of a downer. I really, my main complaint is, give me some wrestling info. Give me some, you know, it didn't talk barely any about his wrestling career other than as the backdrop for his drug addiction.
Which is interesting because with the Cody Rhodes one, I mean, I realized it was a wrestling story, but his was all about wrestling. Like, you had very little information about the ongoings in his life outside of wrestling.
Yeah.
And that might be, like, maybe he's so young that he doesn't have much of a life outside of wrestling. But it's interesting that the 2 documentaries were, I'm assuming, made by the same
I doubt it. No, I doubt it.
No, I mean the same company, like, funded by the same...
I'm not sure about that.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure about that.
I thought that they were doing like a series on features of different wrestlers.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was even the same company. Okay. No.
Well, that would explain the difference, because they had very different feels to them, and they were shot very differently. Like on Kurt's, there was like a lot of extreme close-ups of him during the interview segments.
Well, they were going for like a 30 for 30, like an ESPN 30 for 30 is what they were going for.
Yeah, and Cody's didn't feel that way.
No.
I definitely preferred Cody's.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Not just because this was a downer, but I think they did a better job telling the full story with Cody. Whereas with this one, like you said, they skip over the wrestling.
Skip over the wrestling. Well, the part we know and love him from, wrestling in WWF, WWE, and TNA. Some people discuss almost none of it. None of it. And I wanted to hear about the parts I saw. Plus, I wanted to hear parts I didn't see. I wanted to hear backstage stuff. Give me a little. Give me a story or two.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew it wasn't going to be, I knew it was only an hour and a half or whatever, however long, hour 40 minutes. I knew we weren't going to get everything in the world out of it, but give me a little.
And it's not like they used some TNA footage and they mentioned TNA by name. So it's not like they were trying to avoid the fact that he worked for a different company. Like, they obviously got permission from TNA to use that footage. So why not get permission to use more and show us what his career was like in WWF at the time, and TNA, because I wasn't watching wrestling during any of this time. I was there for his 2-year comeback or whatever, 3-year comeback.
We gotta show you some Kurt Angle.
Yeah, and so, but I'm saying, like, as someone who's not a lifelong fan of Kurt Angle, this would have been a great opportunity to show me some of his wrestling. Like, they showed more of his collegiate and amateur wrestling footage than they did his pro wrestling footage.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Which was interesting because I've never seen amateur wrestling before. Like, to be honest, when I knew Kurt Angle was a gold medalist, I thought it was for weightlifting because I didn't even realize wrestling was in the Olympics. So, like, I had heard he got his gold medal with a broken neck, but I assumed it was for weightlifting because that doesn't really require your neck getting hit, And so to find out that it was for wrestling is just insane. So I went into this totally blind.
Admitting
totally
that
blind,
to too many people, okay?
Why?
Because everybody knows wrestling's in the Olympics. It's like one of the main sports. It's been there since the beginning. It's one of the foundations of the Olympics.
I pay attention to, like, gymnastics, ice skating, and that thing that they do with, like, the skis and the guns.
Ice skating and biathlon is the Winter Olympics.
Yeah.
Those are the Summer Olympics.
I know, but those are, like, the 3 things I pay attention to. And swimming sometimes. Basketball.
Anyways, so... So what would you give it then? I gave it 3 bones out of 5. What do you give it?
I would give it 3.5. I think you knew a lot of this information. Like, I didn't know about any of it. Like, I have obviously, like, not knowing wrestling was in the Olympics or that he was an actual wrestler. That's a big part of the story that was new to me. I had never heard of Foxcatcher or the DuPont story. So that was an insane twist that I did not see coming at all.
That's a crazy story. There's a lot more to that story, too, that they didn't have time. There have been movies made about that story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just so, that. Yeah.
I mean, just everything was new to me. Like, I knew about the milk truck in WWF. That is probably the extent of information that I knew about Kurt Angle. So, that's about it.
All right. Well, folks, thank you for joining us for this kind of look at Angle, /review of Angle. Hopefully you enjoyed it. We did it for American Nightmare. We've done it now for Angle. I think next we're going to do it for the Ric Flair movie that is on Peacock. I think it's called Woo. I think is the name of it. So we're going to take a look at that one next. Let you know what we think. So we do 2 weekly podcasts. On Tuesdays, we do This Week in AEW. And on Saturdays, we do WWE Weekly. So each one will bring you the week's news, rumors, rankings, match results, all that kind of stuff. Trying to catch you up to speed, give you our opinions, some of our ideas on the two big wrestling companies. AEW on Tuesdays, WWE on Saturdays. And then we'll bring you the pay-per-view results as those come. That changes our schedules a bit. One more thing while I have you, I want to put in an ad for. We're doing a watch-along Saturday, September 9th. That is this coming Saturday, September 9th at 4:30 p.m. We're doing a watch-along of WCW Halloween Havoc 94. Kay and I are both going to be in costume. Our guest, Dylan, of Last Week in Wrestling, is going to be joining us. He's going to be in costume. We're going to do a watch-along for Halloween Havoc 94. We're going to talk about it, maybe make fun of it a little. It is WCW after all. The main event is Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair for the WCW World Title in a steel cage. The loser must retire. Mr. T is the guest referee. That's the main event, folks.
And this is just the first in a series of Halloween Havocs that we'll be doing.
Correct, yeah.
Leading up to Halloween, so taking you through the spooky season.
Right, that's why we're starting so early, September 9th. We're going to do several Halloween Havocs going through October. So we're going to do some of the WCW Halloween Havocs. We'll probably do one or two of the NXT Halloween Havocs that they've done in the last couple years. And it's going to be a good time. So again, Saturday, September 9th on our YouTube channel, No Bones About Wrestling, 4:30 p.m. Meet us, and then we'll hang out for a minute. We'll all press play probably around 4:40 p.m. We'll have a countdown, don't worry. And we'll all watch it on Peacock on the WWE Network. And we'll all have a countdown and press play at 4:40 p.m. So we'll all be watching it at the same time.
And if you can't catch it live, don't worry, it's YouTube, so you can always catch it later. You'll be able to hit play when we count still and catch the whole show. Exactly.
And Thope, thank you for listening to us. And if you haven't listened to our Cody review of the American Nightmare movie, go and check that one out. And, as McFoley would say, have a nice day. Bye.